Raidieraksts Drošinātājs. Hello, Ivona.
Hello.
You are the co-founder of Ukraine's Vetteran Hub. What it is?
So Vetteran Hub is a nationwide network of support for veterans and their family members. We've launched in 2018 in Kyiv as a pilot project, but ever since we have grown and we have multiple representations across the country. Basically, if you would imagine it, it's a very nice open space where veterans can come and receive services like legal advice or employment support or case management in a very friendly environment. It's like a one-stop shop for psychosocial services you would need as a veteran in Ukraine. We also provide services as a mobile office. So if you live in rural areas or you have hardships in accessing services, we would come to you and provide the service at home or at your community, wherever is more convenient for you. It would be just the same array of services and also psychological services. You could also call our trust line or you could show up to our partner location. So it's quite a diverse variety of ways that we provide services to veterans and their loved ones. We also do analytical research, so we have an internal think tank that provides us with the knowledge on tendencies and the needs of our audience, and we do a lot of advocacy projects based on what we learn from veterans in our daily interaction with them.
Is this a NGO?
Yes, this is an NGO. It's a charity organization that's funded through multiple streams of international grant funding.
I imagine in 2018, when you just started, the amount of people who would have needed your services was much, much less than now, knowing that the full-scale invasion has been going on for 2 years now. And there are so many people that have gone through the front line and came back and needed support. How can you handle that amount of people?
It has been an issue for quite a long time for us now. So in the beginning, of course, when we were starting, there were about 360,000 people who've gone through ATO-GFO plus their families. It's still a large amount, given that Ukraine actually didn't have a veterans care system. So we've inherited a lot of legislation and approaches and even our stereotypes from the Soviet Union when we were under occupation. But we never actually rethought that for independent Ukraine. And ATO-GFO was a big challenge because of that. We had to come up with a system that was non-existent and was non-human before us coming into the field. But we always understood, grace to international experience, we've looked at Denmark, at the US, at Canada, that veterans will need support for much longer than we heard anticipated among our colleagues. So people would say, well, it will take a year, it will take 2. But when we went abroad, we saw that veterans were still struggling with the experience 20, 25 years later. And if we were to build something sustainable for them for that long run, we need to be very efficient and we need to be very systematic in our approach. And so basically from the start, we were building an institution instead of a crisis response. And basically, when the full-scale invasion started, we understood that the majority of our clients were remobilized for service. So because they had combat experience, they were very much needed in the front, and they were mobilized once again, which gave us some credit of time. Honestly, even now, even with many wounded and many returning due to age and family circumstances, we still understand that we are not at the mass demobilization. For us, this mass demobilization that is probably, hopefully planned for next year is a huge challenge that we are preparing ourselves to, and we're trying to make sure that our systems are well built. So our people are well trained, we have enough resources, spaces, and everything. So at the moment, basically what we are doing in the majority of it is preparing our organizational capacity. Of course, we continue providing services and everything, but we are keeping in mind that the biggest scale of demand will start after the first demobilization.
So but basically it's like everyone in Ukraine waits for the victory, and when the war will stop, but you wait for it with the different thoughts in your mind, because then the real work will start, right?
For us, mainly yes. Our focus is when veterans start to build their new civilian realities after the war and to integrate all of that experience. But we are also mindful of the fact that Ukraine is building reintegration for veterans, and veterans are coming home during a war for 10 years now. So it's kind of part of our reality. And while we are preparing for this scaled demand, next year we understand that our client is not much different since 2018. Of course, the mass atrocities and the type of war has changed, but people continue returning to a civilian, but not a peaceful life, So if in the US, for example, you would imagine a veteran quitting service and building a civilian peaceful life in a safe country to a certain extent, then in Ukraine, this challenge of deciding to quit service while your brothers in arms continue serving, while there is still a war going on, even if you have the right to do so, it's a very big moral challenge for a lot of people. And we've seen that happening since we opened.
Why is there a need for Veterans Hub?
Ukraine did not have a system of veterans affairs, and all of our mindset towards veterans, all of our perception of veterans was very outdated and non-realistic. And so instead of looking at a person and at the person's needs, Ukraine as a system, as a government, as the society, we're looking at a number of stereotypes and stamps that we attributed to veterans. And because of that, we had to create an institution that would actually help translate this experience and show the human side of the veteran experience and would help cover the need that the government does not cover for. So the government never saw veterans as a separate service target audience. They saw them along with many other, as they would call, problematic audiences. And we don't see veterans as such. We see veterans as, first of all, citizens who have quite a different experience and who have different requirements in service provision in certain areas. But unfortunately, there is not much competency among the people. So, for example, in 2019, we figured out that a lot of our clients didn't get good healthcare. And the problem was not that there were no doctors, but the doctors had stigma that veterans were old. And so when they had a young woman, for example, or a young man show up that wouldn't have any attributes of a veteran, wouldn't wear paramilitary clothes or something like that, they wouldn't ask them about their military experience, and that would be overlooked in diagnosis. And so when a veteran after traumatic brain injury suffered a headache, they wouldn't get a treatment for traumatic brain injury consequences, they would get a treatment for a headache, which didn't provide them with the necessary outcomes. And so basically what we did is we went to primary healthcare providers and we taught them about this knowledge, how to question a person, whether they have been to war, whether they have not. We tried to widen their horizon and make sure they understand that veterans can be very young. They can be 18, 19 years old. They can be wounded in battle, and it's not always seen. And so it's very important to ask this question preventively. And we do the same thing with many, many other audiences. We work with employers, we work with psychosocial providers, we work with simple citizens who just happen to know a veteran and help them understand how to better serve and how to better cooperate with veterans in their area of expertise.
How do you see the result of your work?
So I would say that we were a change maker for this field, definitely. When we were starting, people wouldn't call veterans veterans. They would use whatever other word you can come up with, like a fighter or a frontman or something like that, but wouldn't call them veterans as participants of war. We were very consistent in saying those people have participated at war, even if it wasn't called so, and they have the same experience and they should be called accordingly. We also have changed the perception of how veteran services look. So if you would come to Veteran Hub in Kyiv or in any other city, you would see a very, very modern, nice and comfortable space that is very different from what Ukrainians are used to seeing in government buildings, especially in rural areas. And we've seen after our opening in 2018, many others copying this approach, which is a very positive example, actually. And so now it's a new norm that veterans receive services in nice places instead of outdated places. We have just recently posted together with our fellow organizations who have been also working in this field for quite a long time, a huge document on mass recommendations for the government policy. So we literally wrote the state policy and offered it to the government as the basis for the governmental approach for veterans moving forward. This all couldn't have been possible if we didn't work with veterans daily for this whole time. And I think that more is to come, actually, because we were so far behind in understanding those people and their needs that those 6 years, they were only the pilot stage of whatever we could achieve. And now actually we are preparing for first a larger demand, but second also a bigger impact that we can achieve in how their lives are being shaped after the war.
On the one side, you're doing excellent job that needs to be done. On the other side, maybe somebody in the government. I know that Ukraine is changing, but there are still old people living the old ways and stuff like that. There might be some who would think that, oh, you are just showing people that the government is not capable of everything. What has been the response of the government to your work?
So I think in the beginning, we were a bit of a visionary and they didn't really understand what we were trying to say. And we didn't find the right words to explain ourselves. But gradually, we learned to work together with the government where possible. The problem is that in case of veterans, many things are just not there and are just not available to cooperate with. So we have good allies, for example, in the Ministry of Social Policy, but the Ministry of Social Policy will take care of those veterans who will require the most care. They are not the ones who are building the policy for the whole government. I wouldn't say that we ever faced pushback because our work doesn't actually depend on the ministries and the government. We're quite independent in what we do, but we've also seen quite a lot of hesitation and cooperation with us. We've seen some competition in the past. I think that specifically last year, things have started to shift quite significantly. And we've started seeing dialogue, and we've started seeing the understanding among politicians and government officials about why this policy is so important.
So imagine if I'm a veteran in Ukraine and I'm going to one of your hubs. What can I expect? What kind of support, what kind of help can I expect to get there?
So first and foremost, we're the people who would have the time to listen to you. Just everything you have to say, or your whole story, it's not uncommon for people just to want to share what they've been through, not even with a therapist, but just with a friendly person who's there to listen to them. And that is the basis of our service as we see it. But then, of course, whilst talking to people, we learn about their problems and what they have challenges with. In that case, we can provide psychological therapy, which would be professional and which would require enrollment and more longer-term cooperation with the person. We can provide legal advice, primary legal advice. We don't follow people to court. We don't have that resource to kind of go into court and start defending them. But there is a governmental service which is pretty good and free for all Ukrainian citizens and the veterans included, if they need it. And we also provide case management. So basically, we help the person identify their needs in a broad array of well-being domains, like whatever you may need as a person, and to find ways and plan how to secure those needs. So it's a general like social work. And we also provide employment counseling. So if you're looking for a job, if you're looking for re-employment, if you're trying to translate your military experience into something the civilian employer will actually understand on your CV, we would help you do that. And we would help you look for friendly employers who have a policy on veterans, who are working even with us. So, for example, our own organization has over 130 partners among Ukrainian employers who cumulatively employ up to 1 million people in the country and who are currently, with our help, developing their veteran policies. And they have a variety of openings that are also available for our clients.
And you also have put out some few guidebooks and special programs, if you can talk about those.
Yes, so of course, we have thousands of people calling, coming to us, talking to us. And this is a huge benefit of trust that we have from them, and also a lot of hands-on experience that we get. We learn about a lot of tendencies and needs that are overlooked, not always because the government is doing bad, but just sometimes because it's just not the government's job to pay attention to those things. And we do our own internal analytics, so we do in-depth research and we publish quite a lot of those, and we try to make those problems visible and understand underlying reasons for them and how they can be treated. And then we also, based on those, often do our own solutions, and we provide those solutions to the audience that's mentioned. So, for example, we did a guidebook on sex and intimacy that's called Sex for wounded veterans and their partners who are recovering together and who are looking for a way to restart their intimate relationships. So we've also done a guidebook for employers called Praktika, teaching them how to be good employers to veterans and how to audit their processes to suit veterans' needs. We've been doing the same thing, a guidebook for state employment agencies on how they can best treat veterans in their interaction, and many, many others. So for mental health providers, for primary healthcare providers. And we also did one for veterans quite recently on conscious parenting. And actually, it wouldn't even be fair to say that it is for veterans because the primary audience there is their spouse. We did a guidebook on pregnancy, planning the pregnancy, the actual pregnancy, labor, and the first year postpartum in times of war in military families. Because when you look at it, most likely those women either were pregnant before the war started or they got pregnant during a war, meaning that their loved one is likely in the military and hasn't had the chance to be close to them. And we thought about those women, and we thought about the situation that they're in and the information that they might be lacking, going to simple women consultations in labor units to pediatricians who are not very well informed about the peculiarities of such relationships and the burden those women are actually taking on. And we created a guidebook for them. We distributed it through maternity wards, through women's consultations, and through pediatricians to make sure they reach those women who are waiting for their husbands or to return from war, being pregnant or soon after labor. And we also created a set of information for the parents, for the husbands, because it happens so that while being in the military and while fighting with Russia, it's quite an intense job. You don't really have the time to watch movies, or go through a course. But we tried to condense the information into 10-minute videos about how you can be a supportive partner, even not being there, or how you can participate in labor if you are lucky to get the vacation and to actually get there by the time that your wife goes in labor, how to take care of a child. So everything normally a father would learn probably in preparation for pregnancy, but it's just the reality that the military guys, they don't have the time to do this, especially if it's their first kid and especially if it's their first kid while they're in service. So it's very mindful of how is it to be a father who is not sure if he's going to be there during the raising of his kids. It's quite a intense experience, and even making the decision to have kids during a war is very, very hard, to be honest. And we condensed a lot of information for the spouse. So for the woman who's taking on this motherhood role during a war with a spouse in the military, and we created a book for her, yes, but it is written in a very particular language, and it makes focus on the areas important for her. So how do you build a relationship as new parents, being not together, not being able to see each other for months and sharing this information? How do you make sure that the father gets the feeling of parenting? Or how do you mitigate this all? How do you cope with loneliness? How do you cope with anxiety? How do you cope with the fact that you don't have help around? Because the reality of those women is that unless they have somebody close, which is not the case oftentimes, they are left alone with their kid, worrying about their husband being in the front lines and not being able to change the situation. And so our chance there with this communication was to give them a friendly reminder that they're not alone, they're doing a great job, and to give them some hints on how they can feel better while doing it.
Among our listeners are definitely many young parents or people who are just thinking about to become parents. I don't want you to tell me everything that's in your guidebooks in 2 minutes. Of course, that's not possible. But I just want to get our listeners to get the idea what it means on very human level. Help me understand what it is. You are on a front line. You have to kill your enemy. At the same time, your spouse is giving birth to your first child, maybe, right? What is the situation like?
So, first of all, when you're in the military, sometimes killing people is your job. And what we hear from our clients is that they don't pay that much attention to the fact, because it is not about killing people, it is about doing your duty and defending your country. Well,
I phrased the question wrongly. I didn't mean to, you're killing people. I mean, you're defending your country, of course. I'm not talking about that. But yeah, at one point, you just have to be a soldier, but at the same time, your thoughts are maybe back home with your wife, right?
Absolutely. When you're there and you're doing your job, and this job it's 24/7. You don't really have breaks. You don't have a schedule or something. You're always on the run and you're doing something. And it is very, very different from the state of mind even that you would be at home. So when you're relaxed, when you feel safe, that is something that is not available for Ukrainian soldiers for 2 years now. They're not safe. They're not relaxed. They are not empathetic because they are not relaxed in many cases. So they're not that invested into the relationship. And also there is a lot of feeling of guilt and shame because my loved person is out there struggling with the experience that is so big and so large and so hard. And there is almost nothing that I can do to help. They might, for example, ask for a vacation or for a weekend to go and support their spouse, but it's not always available and it's not always possible. They're also afraid for their own life, and they might feel that while this huge responsibility that we're taking on together, my wife might take it on her own if I die. They might feel distance from their kids because it's just so hard to accept that you are not there to witness how they're growing. I think that this feeling that I'm not there while my kids are growing is a big, big pain point in Ukrainian veterans and soldiers that we've been seeing in the past years. It's actually a tragedy from my point of view, because when you have kids, you see them grow very fast and you see them change very fast. And what we've heard in interviews of spouses is that I feel so sorry for my spouse who's a soldier for missing out. Like, he started walking, or he started talking, or he just did this fun thing that he won't ever witness, not only for the first time, but just like he'll miss a whole stage of his life and not be able to be present there, not be able to build a connection. And that being said, it's important to understand that most of our soldiers, they did make a conscious decision. This is also making it harder to a certain extent, because by some means, to protect your country and protect the livelihood of your family, you have to choose between your family's safety and your country's safety. And most of them chose the country. And that means they cannot be there to protect their family firsthand. Many families stay in Ukraine. They survive shellings, they go to shelters, they live during a war. They don't live in a peaceful land while their loved ones are in the front line. Just being in that position is unbearable for many. In reality, it leads to distanciation, because sometimes when you cannot bear a feeling, you're just trying to block it away. But also, it can lead to a lot of frustration, and it can lead to acceptance. We see that 2 years into the war, a lot of families have gotten used to it, and it's just the way things are. And I see that partners and soldiers are trying to do their best to be in the lives of their children. They're making a lot of effort, and it's very creative effort. They're making dates with children online, and they're kind of teaching them stuff. They're doing math together when they have time. They're having breakfast over video when they have the time. And it's at the same time heartbreaking to see and very uplifting to see as well.
For whom it is more difficult, if you can sort of say that in general, for the soldiers who are at the front line, or for the spouse back home who just gave birth or raising the kid?
I think it's incomparable. So those are just two different experiences in the same family unit, and both of those people are struggling in a different way. I think that what spouses feel is a sort of alienation, because when you're a spouse of a military, you're not a civilian 100%, because you don't live the life civilians do. You don't enjoy the things civilians enjoy. You don't have that peace of mind that many people do have when their loved one is close. But you're also not in the military. You're not part of a spouse group, or you're not connected to the brothers in arms of your husband. You're just out there, mostly on your own or with your family or close friends. It depends on the circumstances. And I think that this loneliness is probably one of the largest challenges for those women. And the fact that they are not recognized legally, they're not recognized societally to the appropriate extents. So it's kind of an unseen experience that is just there. It's huge. It's very powerful, in my personal opinion, but it is not recognized as heroically as the experience of the military. But for the military guys, it's not easier. Giving up all that and missing out on their lives and missing out on their own civilian identity, missing out on the relationships with their children, with their spouses, on the ability to be a good spouse, as you would imagine, to contribute to the family household, to take care of them when they need to be taken care of. Not being able to do that is also a very, very hard experience. I think that people who find strength to still do it, and they find creative ways to be close, to remain trusted while going through so many heartbreaking issues, is a huge power, and I admire it from a personal level a lot.
Can you take something from the Western research, let's say, and apply it to Ukraine? I'm asking this because in United States, in UK, in Germany, or in France, soldiers are professional soldiers. The spouses mostly, they know who they are marrying to or getting into a relationship. They know that if I marry a soldier, there is some side effects to that. Maybe we will move quite often from base to base or location to location. But here in Ukraine, in 2022, it's sort of became totally different situation, that people who would maybe never thought that they would become soldiers, they became soldiers, and of their own choice. And that's different. You have to adapt to that, right?
I think that's part of the question. But I think that it's also larger than that. So Western research is good because it's there. Ukraine never had data on its own veterans. So we literally never asked questions. We never did research that would be sufficient to actually inform some sort of a policy. So looking back, our generation of Second World War veterans or ONUPA or, I don't know, Afghanistan veterans, those are generations who've struggled a lot, but they struggled mostly under occupation of Soviet Union. They were overlooked. They didn't receive dignified care. And Ukraine also didn't get any information that would inform about what were their needs, how did they feel, what was good, what was bad, because we didn't have the chance to do that. And we have to look to Western research to kind of see what's out there and what can happen. But I'm also very careful when adapting US or other Western research to Ukraine, because it's not only the fact that Ukrainian soldiers are mobilized. A lot of them have become very professional in the 2 years, and many of them have been serving for 10 years since the beginning of Russia's invasion in 2014. I think it's also the fact that Ukraine is building reintegration during an active war. So in the US, in UK, when you come back home, and you're safe and your family has been safe all the way through. But what we've been just talking about, like when you're a soldier in Ukraine, you go to war and your family has to live through war without you. And it's a completely different experience. And you're coming back and you're coming back during a war. Active, non-active, recognized, non-recognized, it's still a war. It's still a lot of challenges. It's still a lot of risks. And you're making the decision to become parents even during a war that has no ending. And I think that this particular fact, it differentiates us a lot from other soldiers in other armies. And we need to be mindful of that. And I think that also our neighboring countries who are evaluating the risk of Russian invasion should also look at our experience a bit more closely and how it affects people and how people learn to adapt and how people actually cope with this experience, because it will be a lot more relatable in case things go sideways than Western experience. That's what we've learned probably in the 10 years.
There are people in Latvia and in Western Europe probably as well. You read time to time in Twitter some comments or something like that. This world as a whole is becoming such a terrible place. Wars, global warming, economical situation and stuff like that. I'm going to be a responsible human. I'm not going to give birth a child into this terrible world. What would be your response to people who say something like that?
I would say that becoming parents is a choice, adult choice that requires a lot of responsibility. I think that being an adult is hard in any times. It might seem harder now than it was 20 years ago, but I don't think it is realistically so. I think that every adult generation is suffering from decisions that you have to make and responsibilities they have to take. And it comes down to whether you're fit for the responsibility, whether you want it, whether you actually want that experience, and whether you're ready for it or not. In regards to responsible parenting in military families, what we try to make visible for the military is that it is natural for people in stress and in immediate danger for their life to feel the urge to reproduce and to have children. And it might be clear, it might be not clear, but sometimes you just get that feeling like, what if I'm dead tomorrow and there's nothing left of me? And whilst this requires a lot of respect to the person's feelings, we urge the person just to take time and think a little bit more about whether they want the parenting experience, whether they want the connection, they want the relationship with the child, whether they want to be parents, or they just are afraid of what's to come. And we touch base on that briefly in the guidebook because it's mostly to people who already made the decision. But in the future iterations of the project, we want to pay a lot of attention to the decision-making process, because even after ATO GFO, we've seen a lot of unconscious decisions happening, which is natural for humankind just when they're in danger. But we've seen a lot of veterans coming more consciously to the choice of becoming parents a bit later in life, after they started feeling better in civilian life, after they just sorted out their whereabouts, where they're working and where they're living, what they're doing in civilian life and stuff like that, and then committing to something so long-term and so complex as parenting. So at the moment, we don't have active campaigns about that, but I think it's worth mentioning that life danger can also lead not to the fear of reproduction, but also to the will to reproduce.
Right. Well, that was very eye-opening. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Raidieraksts Drošinātājs.
Jā, paldies Dīvam. Viņš sarunājās ar Ivonu Kostynu, Vetteran hub līdzdibinātāju. Un, tās pārdomas, laikam, kas man radās pēc šīs intervijas, ir, kaut vai viena no tām ir par to, ka patiesi kā varbūt atšķiras šo te veterānu dzīve, karavīru dzīve pēc tam, kad jau viņš vairs nav frontē, atšķiras no tiem karavīriem, kas varbūt, tajās pašās Amerikas Savienotajās valstīs beidz savus dienesta gaitas. Viens ir varbūt, ka tur tu vari doties tiešām pie savas ģimenes, sākt veidot dzīvi no jauna, kopā ar ģimeni, mierīgi, bet Ukrainā jau tas ir pavisam citādāk. Tur jau turpinās karš un tavi, draugi, paziņas, varbūt pat radi vēl turpina karot, kamēr tu arī tādā kara stāvoklī kaut kā mēģini atgriezties tajā ikdienā, bet ikdiena, kas nebūtu nav mierīga ikdiena.
Jā, katrā ziņā tās ir lietas, par ko ir jādomā, un kā pat Ivona teica, arī jāņem vērā citām Krievijas kaimiņu valstīm šī te Ukraiņu pieredze, un kā jau ļoti daudzi mūsu viesi, viņi ir atvērti sadarbībai, tātad, ja kādam ir interesi par šīm tēmām, tad noteikti varat uzmeklēt Ivonu Ukrainas Vetteran hub. Jā, tik tālu mūsu šīs dienas lielā saruna. Ja jums tā šķiet interesanti, padalieties ar to, aizsūtiet saites uz šo sarunu saviem draugiem, radiem paziņām. Tāpat arī drīkstat likt tur tos laikus vai 5 zvaigznītes vai 1 zvaigznīti, kā jums viss šis šķiet vai nešķiet interesants. Noslēgumā es vēl gribēju tik uz mirkli atgriezties pie Navaļnī nāves. Tur nav mums šeit drošinātāji kontekstā, tur īpaši daudz nav ko runāt. Krievijas opozīcijai acīm redzam ir jātiek pašai ar šo galā, saprotot, kā virzīties tālāk, ko darīt uz priekšu. Bet ja mēs runājam atkal jau drošinātāju kontekstā, tad ir jāsaprot, ka Navaļnīs nebūtu, piemēram, Ukrainā netika uztverts pozitīvi. Viņi tikai redzēja šīs te impēriskās ambīcijas un labi atcerās teksts par Krimu, kas nav viesmaize, kur varētu dot šurp turp atpakaļ. Tāpat arī droši vien jāuzsver ir lielā atšķirība starp rietumiem un bijušo komunismu bloku, ka mums šeit nepietiek vien ar to, ka kāds ir bijis pret Putinu. Tas uzreiz nenozīmē, ka šim cilvēkam nav imperiālo ambīciju, kas apdraudētu Krievijas kaimiņus. Un es jau iepriekš kaut kad esmu runājis par to, ko es gaidīju 25. februārī 22. gadā. Es skatījos uz Krieviju, kāda būs reakcija, vai cilvēku miljoni izies ielās. Jā, arī pēc Navaļnī nāves mēs redzējām cilvēkus stāvam rindās, noliekam ziedus šur tur, Krievijas lielākajās pilsētās. Bija aresti, vairāk 100 arestēti, bet atkal jau šādas te lielās, daudz miljonu valstī atbilstošās reakcijas ielās nebija. To mēs redzējām.
Jā, mēs vērosim, kāda būs opozīcija, cik tā patiesi būs opozīcija Krievijā. Tagad, protams, acis pievērstas Jūlijai Navaļnajai, kura tad ir solījusi turpināt savu vīra iesākto, bet cik tas patiesi būs veiksmīgs. Te mēs varam velkt droši vien paralēlis ar to, kas ir bijis saistībā ar Baltkrieviju. Svetlana Cihanovska arī tiek saukta par opozīcijas līderi, arī atrodas ārzemēs, arī turpina cīnīties par brīvu Baltkrieviju. Varam vilkt un paralēli skatīties, kā viņai līdz šim ir gājis, un skatīties, kā tagad ies Jūlijai Navaļnajai, vai viņai izdosies kļūt par tādu īstu līderi, kas patiešām aiz sevis var pavilkt ne tikai tos, kas jau ir pret Putinu, bet pārliecināt arī tos, kas vēl šaubās, ka viņiem ir jānostājas pret Krievijas autoritāro līderi. To, laikam, visticamāk rādīs tikai un vienīgi laiks.
Jā, katrā ziņā daudz runāja, daudzi izteicās lielākās un mazākās tribīnēs, bet, godīgi sakot, man palika šajā nedēļā atmiņā tikai viens dvēseles kliedziens, un tas bija no kādas Ļeņingradas blokādas pārdzīvojušas kundzes gados Pēterburgā, pēc tam, kad viņa bija nolikusi ziedus, un viņa uzrunāja savus tautiešus lūk šādi.
Хватит крови, хватит ненависти, Pietiek asiņu, pietiek naida, pietiek tā visa. Viņš ir mūsu valsts nodevējs Putins. Viņš cilvēkus padara par vergiem. Es nebaidos, man jau daudz gadu, viņi var mani tikai nogalināt. Es vienkārši gribu kliegt. Putin, mēs taču esam cilvēki. Bez cilvēkiem nekā nav. Bet kāpēc mēs viņā klausāmies? Mūsu taču ir 140 miljoni. Vai tiešām nevaram visi piecelties un pateikt, ej prom no šejienes?
Tas arī šai reizē viss. Atcerieties, drošinātājs tas ir skaidri un personīgi par karu Ukrainā. Raidieraksts Drošinātājs.